According to Russia's Ministry of Finance, the approved federal budget for this year is about 41.5 trillion rubles, and around 32% of it, or roughly 150 billion US dollars, is being spent on the military. It is the largest defense budget in modern Russian history, showing how much Russians are paying for the war in Ukraine. But that is just the surface. Let's break down how this war is tightening the screws on Russians' daily lives, starting with the country's main source of income, oil and gas. Russia is rich in oil and gas because it sits on some of the world's biggest reserves. Most of the oil comes from western Siberia, the Yamal Peninsula, and the Volga-Ural region. Major companies like Rosneft, Gazprom, and Lukoil extract these resources. Before the war, about 60% of Russia's oil exports went to Europe. The main types were Urals blend and Siberian light crude. After Western countries stopped buying Russian oil, Moscow redirected most of its exports to China, India, and a few other Asian countries, often selling them at discounted prices. This means Russia now earns less from each barrel of oil it sells. To make up for the lost income, the government is now squeezing more money from its energy sector by raising export fees and taxes. As a result, companies have increased fuel prices inside Russia to cover their higher costs. At the same time, the war is damaging Russia's fuel production. Ukrainian drones have attacked oil depots and refineries in places like Samara, Ryazan, and Nizhny Novgorod, and several other regions. These attacks have forced several refineries to slow down or stop operations, forcing the country to begin rationing gasoline, which has reduced the amount of fuel available across Russia. The areas most affected are Crimea, the Far East, Siberia, and parts of the Volga region. These regions are far from major refineries, causing delivery delays and frequent shortages. In Crimea and parts of Siberia, gas stations have begun rationing fuel, allowing drivers to buy only about 20 liters per car. Rising fuel prices make it harder for farmers to work and raise the cost of transporting goods, pushing food prices even higher. Electricity bills are also climbing, since many power plants and heating systems depend on the same fuels now in short supply. With winter approaching, families are increasingly concerned about how much more they will have to spend to heat their homes and get through the cold months. To control the crisis, the government imposed a ban on gasoline exports last month and extended it until December 31st, 2025, along with limits on diesel exports to keep more fuel inside the country. As energy profits continue to decline, the Kremlin has turned to other sources of income to keep the economy and war effort running. It now depends on what it calls non-oil revenue, which includes taxes, import duties, and other state earnings. Since oil and gas accounted for only about 25% of the federal budget this year, the remaining 70 to 75% came from these domestic sources. This means most government funding now comes from inside the country, placing greater financial pressure on citizens and businesses. One of the main sources of non-oil revenue is the corporate profit tax, paid by companies on their earnings after costs. Russia raised the rate from 20 to 25% early this year under a law adopted in July 2024. The increase affects major state firms and smaller private companies in trade, construction, and services. To offset the higher tax, many businesses raise prices, freeze wages or bonuses, or delay hiring. Another major source is the value-added tax, or VAT. This tax is built into the price of almost everything people buy, including food, clothes, medicine, and utilities. It currently stands at 20%, but the government plans to raise it to 22% by 2026. Personal income tax is another key contributor. Most workers pay 13%, while higher earners pay 15%. Under federal law number 176FZ, which took effect this year, the highest rate of 22% now applies to people earning more than 50 million rubles annually. This means a portion of every paycheck goes directly to the government before workers receive their wages. Property and land taxes also add to the total. These are charged on homes, buildings, and land owned by individuals and businesses. All these taxes might look manageable on paper, but for many Russians, they quickly add up in daily life. Let's take an estimated look at how a Russian worker might be coping with this situation. According to the official federal minimum wage, a worker earns about 22,440 rubles a month. First, around 13%, or about 2,900 rubles, goes to personal income tax. That leaves roughly 19,500 rubles after tax. Next come the basic monthly bills such as water, electricity, heating, and transport, which have gone up because of the oil and gas shortage. These probably cost around 5,000 to 7,000 rubles, leaving between 12,500 and 14,500 rubles. Then there are personal expenses like clothing, medicines, and school supplies. These might take another 2,000 to 3,000 rubles, leaving about 9,500 to 12,000 rubles. Every purchase, whether groceries, clothes, or services, already includes the 20% value-added tax, which means part of that money still goes back to the government. On average, a worker might spend around 3,500 to 4,000 rubles a week on these basic needs. If that worker also pays rent, which in many cities probably ranges between 10,000 and 15,000 rubles, depending on the area, only a small portion of their income remains. In some cases, less than 1,000 rubles may be left for food and other essentials. Rising prices have made this situation more challenging. The cost of basic food staples has increased significantly. Potato prices have nearly tripled since last year, and the prices of onions, cabbage, carrots, and other vegetables have also gone up due to weaker harvests, higher fuel and fertilizer expenses, and ongoing inflation. In major supermarket chains such as Pyaterochka, old crop potatoes now cost around 84 rubles per kilogram, while new crop potatoes reach about 120 rubles per kilogram, compared with an average of 43 rubles per kilogram the previous year. According to data from Romir Think published in April 2025, Russian households spent nearly 35% of their income on food, the highest share in 5 years and up from 29% a year earlier. This is only an estimated picture, but it shows how many Russians are coping with rising costs amid the ongoing war. But even with these new taxes, the government still struggles to cover its growing expenses. When that happens, the Kremlin turns to its next lifeline, the National Wealth Fund. The fund was created in 2008 to protect pensions and support the economy during financial crises. It was also meant to finance public investments such as schools, hospitals, and roads to improve living standards and strengthen growth. Built from years of oil and gas profits, it became one of Russia's main financial safety nets. Now, as state spending increases, the Kremlin has relied more heavily on the fund, using it not only for social and infrastructure programs, but also to fill budget gaps and finance defense projects. The Finance Ministry confirmed plans to withdraw about 447 billion rubles from its reserves to balance the federal budget this year. Reports indicate that the fund's usable reserves have fallen to their lowest level since 2019, and analysts warn it could be depleted by 2026 if withdrawals continue. What was once meant to secure Russia's future is now being used to sustain its present, showing how deep the country's financial strain has become. To understand how life reached this point, it helps to see how things changed after the war began in 2022. At first, daily life in Russia stayed mostly normal. Shops were open, prices were stable, and many believed the fighting would end soon. Sanctions began, but their impact was limited, and the government moved quickly to stabilize the ruble. By 2023, pressure grew. Sanctions expanded, more men were drafted, and families lost relatives in combat. Imported goods such as electronics and medicines became scarce, prices rose, and people began cutting back on their spending. Many professionals and business owners left the country to avoid conscription or economic uncertainty. In 2024, the economy shifted further toward the war. Military spending increased, and factories focused on weapons production. Prices for food and fuel continued to rise across several regions. The UK Ministry of Defense reported that Russian forces were losing about 980 soldiers each day between January and April 2024. By May, British officials told the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe that daily losses had exceeded 1,000, with more than 465,000 Russian soldiers killed or wounded since the invasion began. By February 2025, the US intelligence community estimated that Russia's total military casualties had risen to more than 700,000, one of the highest figures of the war. The impact is no longer limited to soldiers at the front. It now reaches ordinary civilians, particularly in border regions such as Kursk and Belgorod. These areas are frequent targets of drone, missile, and artillery attacks. Thousands of homes have been destroyed, and more than 110,000 residents have been displaced. Many now live in temporary shelters or with relatives. Since the invasion began, around 800,000 Russians have left the country to escape mobilization, political pressure, or economic hardship. Among them are an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 IT specialists, around 2,500 scientists, and more than 1,600 academics who have moved abroad to continue their work. The wave has also included doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers looking for safer jobs and better facilities overseas. Their departure has left many hospitals short-staffed and unable to cope with the growing number of people injured by constant missile attacks and bombardment. For those who remain, prices continue to rise, electricity is often unstable, and every new missile strike adds to the uncertainty of daily life. No one can say when or if this situation will end.